Welcome, everyone. I'm Dan Borelli, the Director of Exhibitions at the Graduate School of Design. I'd like to begin this afternoon's events by acknowledging that the Harvard Graduate School of Design is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We, the GSD, pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. I also want to honor and recognize the Harvard University Native American program for their work cultivating the relationships that lead to the creation of this acknowledgement. I'm with you today from Framingham, Massachusetts, the traditional land and ancestral land of the Nipmuc, and I pay my respects to the people, past and present, of Nipmuc Nation. So welcome, everyone. And now for today's event, which marks a public conversation around two Harvard exhibitions. At the Harvard Art Museums, the exhibition Krzysztof Wodiczko Portrait, it's open now until April 17th, 2022. And at the GSD Interrogative Design, selected works of Krzysztof Wodiczko open now until February 20th, 2022. These exhibitions are organized jointly by the Harvard GSD and the Harvard Art Museums, and these are made possible by the Graham Gunn Exhibition Fund, Gallery Lalonde and Company, and the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. We would like to acknowledge the Executive Director of the Harvard Art Museums, Martha Tedeschi, and our own Dean, Sarah Whiting, for their ongoing support for this important project. I'd also like to acknowledge my collaborator, Mary Schneider Enriquez, the Houghton Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Harvard Art Museums. And Mary and I have been working together for quite a few years to bring these projects together. At the GSD, the exhibition is really focused on highlights from Krzysztof's 50 years of practice, in addition to his over 12 years of teaching with us at the GSD. First and foremost, we are a teaching institution, and so our focus was on his process in addition to his completed projects. I wanted to show his drawings, and not many people within our community are entirely aware of these drawings. When I mentioned this to Krzysztof, he said, well, these aren't artworks. Please just show reproductions. But I'll put you in touch with Mary Sabatino, the gallerist at Gallery Lalonde. When I got in touch with Mary, she said, please show the originals. Don't let Krzysztof talk you into showing reproductions. And they're really spectacular drawings. They're drawings where we get to witness Krzysztof exploring as well as explaining his projects. And I really want to thank Mary Sabatino and Gallery Lalonde, as well as the Hirshhorn, for their loan of these artifacts to our exhibition. I'd also like to thank the entire GSD communications and, of course, our exhibitions team working together to make this happen. That being said, we are first and foremost a teaching institution, and right now our facilities are accessible only to Harvard ID access members only. So the exhibition is not accessible to the general public. We are just now learning to be together in this new hybrid condition. It's very challenging, but we need to make this space for our students, our faculty, and our staff. So I encourage you to check our website after January 1st, 2022. There'll be more information on whether we'll be able to make this accessible. With that in mind, while you're at our website, we are sharing a lot more content online of Krzysztof's practice, the projects on display, as well as we have just started the process of interviews with Krzysztof. These will be forthcoming. Now I'd like to introduce today's first participant, Erika Naginski. Erika will present a brief talk, and then Krzysztof will follow, and then they'll be in conversation together. Erika is the Robert P. Hubbard Professor of Architectural History and the Narratives Domain Head for the GSD's Masters in Design Studies. So I pass it off to you now, Erika.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I'm going to share my screen to make sure that this works. All right. And also simply to say that this is such a joy for me. I have now known Krzysztof for well over a decade. I first met him when I was an assistant professor at MIT. And what brought us together was a mutual interest in monuments and public space. Me more on the end of the early modern period, but we have been in many conversations over the years. And so I just want to begin here to present a short talk that is addressed as much to you, Krzysztof, as it is to all of you who are gathered with us to celebrate your work and the selection of significant projects that are presently visible on our campus, hopefully soon enough in our public space to everyone. First is the GSD's Druker Design Gallery in Francis Loeb Library, which has been curated by our very own Dan Borelli under the heading of Interrogative Design to showcase how you continually recast civic architectural sites. And here I paraphrase Dan, quote, as a stage setting for ephemeral events in which unseen, unheard, and forgotten peoples inscribe their lived experience. And this is exemplified by what you see here on the left, sans papier, in which 4 illegal immigrants are projected as if sitting in conversation on the edge of the roofline of Basel's Kunstmuseum. And second, just up the street at the Harvard Art Museums, the exhibit curated by Mary Schneider Enriquez, in which you activated through, I must say, a fantastic sort of ventriloquism, Gilbert Stuart's 1795 portrait of George Washington by means of video recordings of young people presenting their points of view on democracy in this politically divisive time. So as an architectural historian interested in the social, political, and aesthetic articulations of public space, admittedly, I've mostly worked on the 17th and 18th century and the French Revolution. I take this opportunity to reflect with you, Krzysztof, on the monument and the memorial, as well as on the plurality of perspectives you have brought to bear on a complex category of production that oscillates confusingly between, on the one hand, what you see here, the potential utility as an exigent palliative for collective trauma from Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial, on the left, to Howler and Yoon, Greg Bleen, Fran Dukes, and Ito Otitigbe's Memorial to Enslaved Laborers at the University of Virginia. And on the other, the kind of its perennial status as an official, conservative, often offensive entity, a dim, gray, colossal, implausibly permanent thing, taking up too much space and corresponding more often than not, as that wonderful historian of the French Revolution, Mona Ozouf, put it, to a, quote, temple of the void. Of course, when she said this, she had the French Pantheon in mind, and you, along the same lines, set in your sights a war memorial like the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, only to transform it into its opposite, a World Institute for the Abolition of War, by means of an enveloping scaffolding outfitted with stairs and viewing platforms. This, in my mind, is as close as you get to what James E. Young coined as the counter monument, that is, quote, memorial spaces conceived to challenge the very premise of the monument, but perhaps we can address this later. So in order to prepare for today's conversation, I want to share with our audience that Krzysztof and I met repeatedly in Gunt Hall. We strolled through the gallery, and instead of pausing studiously so as to linger over the iconography of intentions that coursed through the displays, and these ranged from the Bunker Hill Monument projection of 1998 on the left to the Central Library projection in St. Louis of 2004, I simply asked you, Krzysztof, about the philosophical journey on which this body of work has forced you to embark. And quickly, without hesitation, you began to list what we went on to call a, quote, secular trinity of concepts. And I have to say that in the moment, we laughed at this slightly absurd formulation, even going back and forth a bit about what it ought to include. But I actually thought it quite powerful. That trinity was ultimately this. First, Alois Riegel's unintentional monument. Second, Hannah Arendt's space of appearance. And third, Walter Benjamin's catastrophic history. We haven't had the time to elaborate, but as a provocation for today's conversation, I would like to do just that. You said for a start that the idea of the unintentional monument, elaborated by the art historian and member of the Vienna School, Alois Riegel, in The Modern Cult of Monuments, Its Character and Its Origin, had been transformative for you, even serving as a kind of constant in your understanding of the artistic animation of public spaces. And what's important for all of us to remember here is that Riegel's 1903 essay on the monument, its mnemonic properties, and the principles of conservation dictating its physical state was actually formulated to accompany a proposal for new legislation on the preservation of cultural artifacts and sites. And so what thereby gets articulated is a manifold account of the monument as degraded ruin, both absent and inaccessible, as a surreptitious glance into forgotten origins, as a charged site bearing the traces of epochal change, as an abject vestige, lost, rediscovered, rejected, and reconceived. It's in this context that the ungewollte Denkmale, or unintentional monument, emerges as a value among many that we may ascribe to an object that, regardless of original commemorative aims, is identified by the viewer as simply being a monument, and its status as such is therefore retrospectively determined. In other words, the relationship of viewer and object takes priority over that of maker and object when we speak of unintentional monuments. When the interpretation of posthumous viewers displace the ideological messages that might have been articulated by original makers. This posits the longue durée, of course, as well as the premise of forgetting, behaving much like the dead metaphor that can be brought back to life with a new semantic charge. In the unintentional monument, I think you see permission, even freedom, and unlike the counter monument, whose meaning can be hemmed in by its intractably agonistic and self-destructive stance, the unintentional monument transforms that which it makes present again, only to project it forward into the future under new guise. Hence, when we consider your collaborative projection on the statue in Warsaw of the 18th century director and playwright Wojciech Bogusławski, entitled The Supposed Miracle, or Statue Comes Alive, the Pygmalion trick of reanimating the so-called father of Polish theater as real presence involved readings performed by the actors of the National Theater, what art critics have called monumental trickery, engineered through communicative prosthetics involving the voices and faces, the hands and limbs of the living. What is rehearsed here then, among other things, is an allusion to the silencing of Bogusławski's politically incendiary opera, The Supposed Miracle, or Krakowians and Highlanders of 1794, which was banned after only 3 performances and led to a warrant being issued for the arrest of its author. In sum, the unintentional monument does not counter through juxtaposition, like the counter-monument, but rather the unintentional monument reinvents or revives by superimposing and projecting. And as I think you've said, Krzysztof, the advanced kind of technological prosthetics at our disposal to make this happen, the microphones, slides, staffs, videos, drones, and so on, are the means to assert our communicative rights. They are the means to form the commons anew. Which brings us to the second term in our secular trinity of concepts, the public realm itself, and what the philosopher Hannah Arendt embraced in an almost utopian sense as the space of appearance. There is actually deep slippage in Arendt's writings, especially in The Human Condition, published in 1958, between the polis and the public realm. The polis, properly speaking, she writes, is not the city-state in its physical location. It is the organization of the people as it arises out of acting and speaking together. And its true space lies between people living together for this purpose, no matter where they happen to be. It is the space of appearance in the widest sense of the word, namely the space where I appear to others as others appear to me, to make appearance explicitly, end of quote. This is a remarkable assertion, an assertion about the shared power of collective action, in as much as it is set alongside the dignity of the individual's right to be seen, to be heard. Such an assertion arises out of an account of human activities that posits that the value placed on the contemplative life, or vita contemplativa, by the ancients ran the risk of diminishing the agency of the active life, or vita activa. For Arendt, there is no hierarchy here. They are simply different entities. And ultimately, the establishment of the modern state apparatus will achieve a tragic disempowerment of both, resulting in the degradation and decimation of the realm of free and collective action. I actually like to think of some of your works along these lines as a reigniting, however fleetingly, of Arendt's space of appearance. With Police Car, for example, in which symbol and practice and praxis coalesce to foreground the contemporary reincarnation of the ancient Greek polis, or quote, that city which is also a community in which citizens can participate directly, end of quote. The new polis appears in urban space as an engine-powered vehicle on three wheels in your hands, which can contain a citizen band radio frequency by which the homeless might establish a communication network. Quote, this sort of network, as the exhibition catalog for your Hiroshima Arts Prize asserts, could increase or make possible the following: security for the homeless polis, social and cultural solidarity, various kinds of urgent support services, exchange of information on job opportunities, and so on, end of quote. In short, Police Car gave the homeless a glimpse of Arendt's space of appearance on what she so famously phrased as the right to have rights. Hence, it is vital that this space of appearance be made possible by technological implements at all scales, such as Alien Staff of 1992, which resembles an archaic shepherd's rod, all the while outfitted by the technological. A small video monitor, a loudspeaker, enabling immigrants to meet each other in urban space and communicate life stories in all their legal and moral dimensionality. As my colleague Eva Lodger-Burkhardt has explored in a really wonderful essay entitled The Global Wanderer, immigrant instruments like these, which evoke the realist painter Gustave Courbet's 1854 painting, The Meeting, quote, represent identity as an effect of specific psychosocial mechanisms of cross-cultural identification, a mechanism which these devices both play upon and problematize, end of quote. And finally, to turn to the third term, the philosopher Walter Benjamin, whose catastrophic history you ultimately reject, somewhat to my surprise, but I now understand. As Benjamin wrote with his prized possession in mind, Paul Klee's 1920 monoprint made by means of an oil transfer method he had devised, quote, a clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet, end of quote. This is, of course, a partial citation of the famous ninth thesis of the Theses on the Philosophy of History written in 1940. But it is enough to underscore that the angel simply cannot see the future, cannot turn towards it, cannot project, cannot see anything but the catastrophic past. I purposely set the image in question against what the American artist Rebecca Howe-Quaitman discovered as part of a project she had carried out for the Tel Aviv Museum of Art in May 2015. That project, a series of paintings and graphic works, focused, among other things, on an exchange of letters between Benjamin and the historian Gershom Scholem, in which they discussed Klee's winged figure. And what ensued was a remarkable discovery by Quaitman, that Klee's angel of history had actually been mounted over what you see on the right, an 1838 engraving after a portrait of Martin Luther by Lucas Cranach the Elder. This became Quaitman's central problematic, a rumination on the power of images and on Klee's own intervention in a tradition of Protestant iconoclasm that might, quote, achieve the redemption of the image itself, end of quote. So it's somewhere between Benjamin's words and Klee's image, between the premise of catastrophe and that of redemption, that I begin to understand your rejection of the angel's apotropaic orientation to the past. As you forcefully told me, Krzysztof, if Benjamin's monument sends a warning, the angel of history flying backwards should also have a rear view mirror. Projection is that rear view mirror. And for you, Klee's is no angel, but rather an agent of history. So what to do with angels, or at least winged figures in city centers, like the goddess Concordia set atop Stuttgart's victory column, commemorating the prowess of German soldiers during the Napoleonic Wars. What you saw here instead in 1983 was a catastrophic homology between the column and the missile. Indeed, a specific type of missile, the American Pershing II, a solid-fueled, medium-ranged ballistic weapon capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and developed the very year you projected it without the city's permission and with the help of artists from the Künstlerhaus onto the shaft of the colossal column for 2 hours on one dark night. And here's the rub. All this unfolded in the midst of Germany's national election campaign, in which the Christian Democratic Party, hoping to garner votes, touted the deployment of Pershing IIs across Western Germany's major cities with the argument that peace could only be secured through the imposition of might, an idea neatly reiterated in the victory column's own historical inscription. It is in this sense that a constitutive difference emerges in the body of work that we saw in Ghent Hall together, that between slide projection and video projection. If the single image slide projection stands as an intentional reinscription, or more precisely, as an intentional reassertion of the column's death-oriented mission, video projections yield authoriality to the superimposed subject who is speaking or moving. Faces thus become facades at the Tijuana Cultural Center on the so-called ball designed by architects Pedro Ramirez Vasquez and Manuel Rosen Morrison, where the projection in a city on the border between Mexico and the US was the result, as you explain on the website cataloging your works, of having gained the trust, quote, of a group of Mexican women who spoke about their traumatic experiences, sexual harassment at the workplace, domestic violence, family disintegration, police brutality. The participants took part in a live projection thanks to a special head-mounted device comprising a camera, microphone, portable transmitter. Blown up to huge dimensions, the live faces of six women and their amplified voices, speaking of issues that were taboo, claimed the city space through projection. To recapitulate, an unintentional monument involving the ephemeral morphing of an architectural edifice to culture into a podium for collective speech acts. Second, a space of appearance for the otherwise invisible and abused. And finally, a forward-looking response to catastrophic history through projection, visibility in the public realm, and the ability to face the future. And that's where I end, and I'm going to hand it off now to Krzysztof.
Thank you so much, Erika, for such a generous introduction. We've been discussing those matters over a long time, as you mentioned. So there's a history of us expanding on those topics, those three important aspects that also are part of a public space, the future, the well-being of public space, and of the democratic process. So before I'll be focusing on, at this point, on one project, the one that involves the monument, because it's clear a very important issue that connects both of us, the unintentional monument concept. But I like to say something about a public space. You mentioned about Hannah Arendt, about space of appearance. Now, Hannah Arendt also said that visibility and equality are interconnected. Therefore, invisibility and inequality go hand in hand. Well, that is definitely especially true for many people who seem to be invisible and not understood, not heard. Those are the immigrants, legal and illegal, war veterans, their families, survivors of present-day slavery, of domestic violence, police brutality, and exploitation at the workplace. Well, and the refugees, those civilian war veterans, veterans of civil wars, especially now, visibly invisible today. They are the ones about whom we are saying all kinds of things, but their possibility of opening up and sharing their unspeakable experiences in public space is extremely limited, even if they end up living in those public spaces for no other place to live. So those public spaces are also populated by not only refugees and homeless people, but also by monuments. So the cities are inhabited by population of monuments and population of strangers, refugees, people who who have actually no other place to go often, but live on their steps. So that's important if we go back again to our hopes for public space and democratic process. Well, it is actually a space of rights, public space, but on condition that one can recognize each other in that space, and that space does not belong to anybody, any particular, but it is open to everybody to bring a new meaning to it and to exchange points of views and positions on various issues, bring to the public something that ought to be made public, but it is relegated to some domain of privacy or secrecy or silence. So if that's the case, then the issue is who should have a priority here to open up and speak? Who should be this present-day parasiastes, that free speaker? If not people who can see the world from the point of view of the lowest position, to see things from the bottom up rather than from the heights of those monuments down. So the very well-being of democratic process depends primarily on those people's capacity to open up for open speech and public expression. They should be the first to receive an opportunity to do so, to communicate the truth of their lives in public space. So, of course, I try to contribute to such an opportunity. But unfortunately, many of them are so overwhelmed by the very experiences that they might wish, or we wish they could share with us, that they keep silent. So creating conditions for them to communicate with others in the existing public space, and for others, or for us, to come closer and listen, requires exceptional help: psychological, cultural, artistic, and technological. So since 1980s, I've been projecting slides on the monuments, but later also video images with sound onto the monuments and building, and also designing some equipment for people to be able to communicate and speak, prosthetic equipment, as Erika rightly call it. So those, of course, projects assist the marginalized city inhabitants in making themselves visible and to appear. But of course, that issue, that psychological aspect, that is creating conditions for them to speak despite the traumatized silence, is part of the process of which I cannot show in slides or videos, because it takes such a long time, and it's about recording and recording, trying to find words and expression, and finally deciding that that's something that ought to be said, or even speaking directly in real time through some interactive installations that engage monuments. And I will try to actually share with you one of those projects, whether it's successful or not. It was an extremely important attempt on my part. So this what we see here is a statue of Goethe and Schiller. As colleagues, of course, as you can see, Goethe is a little more firm about his prestige and reputation, and treating Schiller a little bit like a protege. somebody who is younger and needs his support, which is in fact the case because Schiller was in fact a refugee himself. He was a doctor in some military service and escaped that service, crossed several checkpoints and borders in highly divided Germany at that time, and ended up hiding under, I think, pseudonym in Weimar. And so Goethe was eventually became his friend, but also a supporter. Now, I'm bringing this up because this projection has taken place in a very serious moment in Germany of a major influx of immigrants, of refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan. That's enormous amount of people were accepted, welcomed, in fact. Exceptional case in history. So clearly, in this situation, I know I needed to find some important way for those difficult experiences to be shared with the residents of Weimar. And I thought that the statue of Goethe and Schiller, which in fact operates in Germany in many replicas, it's a major icon of friendship and support. And also not everybody knows, of course, support to the refugee, that could be used as a vehicle through which the residents of Weimar could establish contact with refugees on condition that they would be speaking through the monument, and the public could actually ask questions and establish communication via the same monument in the reverse direction. So in that sense, the statues of those two artists and philosophers will be useful, will carry on maybe the image, the voice and the gestures of new philosophers, of those who really have important things to say about the future of the country to which they arrived, and also the future of the world, which hopefully will not create any more conditions for refugees. About more than 70 million of them actually are now crossing this globe in forced displacement. So in that sense, those who will be speaking to those monuments will be agents. They will speak on behalf of others who cannot do that. Their position will be elevated, rightly so, on the pedestal, but they will really try to announce something, denounce something in a prophetic way. So the idea was a very simplified diagram. In fact, in reality, it's much more complicated. So in the theater that you've seen before, behind the sculpture, there was a plan was to create a studio to which refugees could be invited to speak, to be filmed and in real time or almost real time projected onto this statue. So it would be, as Erika already mentioned, would be like in case of Boguslavski, but it would be in real time or almost with little delay in real time. But in real time, most of the time, so it will allow people, members of the public, to elevate themselves on similar level and ask questions or respond to questions posed by Schiller and Goethe, but Schillers and Goethes, refugees themselves. Well, they could then say, well, could you just move to the right so I can see you better? What is your name? And so forth. So this kind of encounter via the monument, via the artifice that is partially real and partially fictitious and partially real, and might create better conditions for recognizing the uncanny strangeness on the part of those viewers, members of the public, who may have repressed over years through the cultural training their own strangeness and somehow delegated or relegated to the newcomers. But I realize there is a link between newcomers and the residents, and there are things to share. Now, that is very important objective of this kind of cultural project. So we were doing some tests before we moved into the theater. By the way, the theater which we are looking at was a very important place historically. That's where Weimar Republic was actually formed. That was the parliament. The theater was turned into parliament. So this is another monument or the witness of great and questionable events and even terrible events in Weimar during, before the Second World War and during the war. And also it's part of East Germany. So it's witnessing other things, pretty tough experiences. Oh, this is not part of the direct part of the projection, but there may be a little bit of a mental projection on the part of viewers. They realize how important that place is. First of all, those sculptures will not be there if the place was not important. But we were outside doing tests, so you can see the amount of equipment. Most of it was moved into the theater. So once the projectors were switched on, you could see two people, monuments that were ready to speak. Those often the person who was speaking through Goethe was not necessarily a refugee. It was also a person who was helping a refugee. So I'm kind of taking a little bit of this position of Goethe historically, taking care of newcomer Schiller. The public actually eventually learned how to address those sculptures, speaking sculptures, saying, Schiller, can you tell me how it happened that you arrived here? Of course, with some sense of humor, that kind of animation of inanimated sculptures, which also is both frightening and humorous at the same time. It's very hard to explain how there's also a dream of moving statue historically well inscribed in our cultural traditions. So people are kind of kind of expecting, at the same time they are shocked by the fact that what they might be expecting or imagining actually is happening. So so you see here on the slide the person who climbed on the steps in order to get closer to the proximity to those monuments, and use the microphone could speak. Of course, those refugees and their helpers inside of the theater in a studio, they saw this person's face because the camera was picking up that person, so they could see that person as we now see each other via Zoom. But of course, it's important that those who were speaking, animating the monuments, they must have also seen themselves, how they look. So there was another camera and another screen, so they could see how they are how they appear as Schiller and Goethe. So just difficult for me to explain. Enormous amount of feedback technology here, wires run back and forth to create a sense of communicative conditions for people to be able to speak. I know we, of course, are now using this technology in some ways in this today. So, in a sense, the people who are speaking too with Goethe and Schiller were on the stage as much as Schiller and Goethe. Let's look closer how it looked in the theater. It was very primitive system, but you can see a number of screens. Also, those who were animating the monuments, they had to make sure that they fit the monument. So there is a paratheatrical process here of trying to become a monument at the same time, not being frozen, but with gestures and voice to bring monument to life, but within the form of the sculpture, not departing from that from the monument itself. So on the screen, you could see themselves more or less fitting the sculpture. And so it was maybe 2 or 3 minutes needed for them to start wearing those monuments, so to speak, and for the team of projection mapping, very talented people, to quickly take all the parts of their body and put them together in such way that they really fit. So during those maybe 2 minutes, there was a pre-recorded material projected. And that pre-recorded material was projected almost over the period of the year when we were appearing and disappearing. And they were kind of thinking and discussing what ought to be pre-recorded. By this process of pre-recording and inscribing themselves in advance, they also were ready to improvise and speak things which they didn't say before, especially when they were when they noticed that what they say is taken seriously. They also could see the public in the plaza through some of the screens. And also the questions were asked, maybe trivial sometimes, but the answers may not be trivial, but also the very communication, exchange, even over laughter, it's very important. Here, Walter Benjamin, speaking of Brecht, he mentioned that that sometimes the vibration of the diaphragm when one is laughing provide better conditions for the beginning of thinking than the vibration of the soul. So clearly, those disruptive moments actually are a very important part of the projection. So we should show the video now. Yes.
Also findest du dieses Label Flüchtling oder Geflüchtete, nachdem du jetzt schon ein Jahr hier bist, immer noch in Ordnung? Oder glaubst du nicht, dass mittlerweile alle Leute, die hierher kommen, auch als gleichgesinnte, normale Bürger Deutschlands irgendwie anerkannt oder behandelt werden sollen?
Eigentlich in 2012 habe ich mein Land vergessen wegen der schlechten Situation. Und ich war in anderen Ländern, in im Libanon und in der Türkei.
Aber wie würdest du dich heute selbst bezeichnen? Bist du ein Asylbewerber? Bist du ein Flüchtling? Bist du geflüchtet? Ein Refugee? Mulham? Ein Mensch? Wer bist du jetzt nach einem Jahr?
Es ist wie ein Mensch, ja. Und das ist falsch, es tut mir leid.
Ich war die einzige Frau im Asylheim, ohne Familie, ohne irgendwelche Unterstützung. Und meine Erfahrung dort war schwer und schlecht auch.
At this point, I guess just to leave time for discussion and elaborations. So thank you very much for your attention. Of course, there was much more to what our refugees were saying via those monuments and what the public was saying, but there's no time to show the entire video.
Krzysztof, thank you so much. And I have to say, I'm touched that you chose the symbol of friendship for today, because some of your work can be very intense and devastatingly beautiful, but devastatingly harsh. And there is something wonderful and affirming about returning to friendship as a category. One of the things I love about that friendship under the aegis of Romanticism, is that it lasted so long. And there's an incredible correspondence. They read each other, they responded to each other's works, they co-wrote. And as I was thinking about that, I wondered if you could say a little bit more, actually. I don't know, this is sort of off the wall. It just occurred to me today as I was listening to you and thinking about this Schiller-Goethe friendship. Is there a place beyond the oral, beyond speech, the place that writing provided for them in their friendship? The epistolary, the novel, the drama, the poem, and it just struck me that in some ways the archive of their friendship was absolutely creative. And I just wondered if you had thoughts about that.
Well, I don't have that much information, in-depth information about relationship between them. It's clear that some of those refugees also are artists. There was the festival of films of refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan. One of the persons who was speaking was actually an important person in television, the media. So lots of media people. They are the first targets of attack by Taliban. The people who actually are capable to express and communicate things. So
It's interesting that you say that, Krzysztof, because I also remember that also the targets can be those who may not have that status. Also, by the same token, I'm thinking, I have a friend, she was an MIT student, and you may remember her, but she started after the bombing of Aleppo in Syria. She worked in a refugee camp and had all the children draw plans of their home, which is a kind of marvelous sort of, painful but healing path, I suppose. And it's just interesting to me, and maybe this takes us to the next question, is the kind of status of technology that almost seems to replace the romantic pen. the quill and the pen and the ink. And I just wanted to hear more about it. It just strikes me so much. They are prosthetic. They are cyborg-like. They are a kind of very contemporary manner of, the Pygmalion tour de force. And I wonder how your thoughts have changed over the years about this technology and slide video, etc.
Well, I began with simple slide projectors, Kodak carousel projectors in the 1980s, early 80s. Technology is always there. Technology is technology, or media is media. People use the term new media, which means they really mean media. Because there's nothing else new. 19th century actually was very much a media era. Actually the first presentation of electric light was in opera in Paris. Chopin wrote about this to Georges Sand. And there was actually opera Lully called Soleil, the sun. So it was the first presentation. So I think Goethe also was very much interested as well in science and technology.
Absolutely.
So I think this is not, but myself, I'm just thinking that those technologies of visualization, animation, expression, as a great opportunity to engage public space. Public space is already saturated incredibly with media. So it is not possible for contemporary parrhesiasts to simply stand up and speak in Agora. But it's Agora is packed by billboards. It's actually by powerful speakers who cannot stop speaking at the expense of lots of people, especially minorities, who cannot say the word. So that is the kind of public sphere that became more of a sphere of publicity, as Habermas would say, rather than communication. So that means I'm just trying to catch up, using as much as media as possible to really sustain visibility and help people to assert the rights, communicative rights in public space in face of that incredible armament of media.
It's a good answer. It brings up, though, and this is something I gathered after rereading Ava's piece on the staff, on the alien staff, that, as I heard you talking about how projecting the person onto the Goethe or the Schiller figure took a little bit of, jiggering to get it right, to fit the statue, to wear the statue. That kind of superposed embodiment does very clearly create purposefully a kind of uncanny disjunctive effect, right? And so there's something quite powerful about that psychic aspect, which is only sort of made possible by the technological apparatus. And so it gives, yes, why I quoted Hannah Arendt, or it allows for the communicative possibility. By the same token, there's always this auratic presence of the uncanny, of the kind of fragmented, of the complicated, of the partial, of the not quite fitting in. And I'm fascinated by that effect. I'm not sure what my question is, but I'm fascinated by that effect. And I wonder if you could say a few words about it.
I don't fully understand all of the aspects of this, of what I do, to be honest. I'm just learning. In fact, when you mentioned about Alois Riegel, when I began my work, I didn't know anything about Alice Weigel. But eventually I found that text, and so it helped me to understand better what I've done. So in that sense, it's kind of always behind understanding what I'm doing, and I'm still doing it. So I'm not sure if I can respond to.
No, I'm not. I don't. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. It also reminds me, though, of what it is to be an actor. I'm thinking of Diderot and the paradox on the comedian, and how actually to inhabit the other.
Yes. So this,
right?
it is. Yeah, I mentioned that it's a para-theatrical situation.
Yeah, exactly.
So to wear the sculpture, it's like in the Greek ancient theater, extremely heavy costumes and masks as well. There is a sense of wearing a mask here because one's face is both the face of a Goethe or Schiller and one's own face. It's a combination. So one could even pretend or imagine that one is not recognized, because it's hard to recognize unless somebody knows so well the person. It's very hard to recognize as that actual person speaking. At least it's possible to, there's a kind of intermediate thing between the public and the person, so that artifice always helps. Speaking, also trying to become Schiller and Goethe, it's also brings certain responsibility, certain public, for once become a person of a stature, public stature. So one has to really make sure that what is being said is really ought to be said. It's an opportunity and it's a responsibility. So they're wearing the costume and being on a stage, also elevated on a pedestal, and all of this, it brings somebody, creates a situation which one transposes, extrapolates the personal into public, into social. But what I think is even more important in case of statues, it is extrapolation of the personal into historical. So the person becomes historical figure. So I mean, as if history was just to start in the moment when one stood up on this pedestal. There was a time before he was on pedestal, or she was, or after. So there was really standing up like this. Well, it must be very memorable moment for those people. It might actually help them to move on with their lives.
I imagine it does, and that just one last thought, and then we'll move to the questions from the audience. But I can't help but ask this: we've been talking about faces, which of course is the most immediate vehicle for identity, for speech, for embodiment. But so much of your work also, say, focuses on hands or legs or feet, and the clenching of a fist, the pointing of a finger. I also wonder what manner of uncanniness that is.
Oh.
The pantomime involved. Let me look into the questions. I think actually our dean, Sarah Whiting, has sent in a question, which I think I'll read out, Krzysztof, and we can sort of think through it together. She writes, I have two related questions around the challenge of time. First, do you have any stories of impacts that have extended past the duration of these projections? Is there a longue durée of impact? So that's the first question. And second, you have shifted from slides to videos. Are there other media you have explored, are exploring to expand the voice of people who usually don't have one?
Well, I cannot, maybe there's no point to show all the other projects, but yes, sound and vision is very important for me. But I've been designing special equipment that the companions for people, for strangers, so or the doubles, in fact, so they could speak and communicate. But also recently we've been using drones to turn those strangers into angels who speak from the sky, or some
Right.
kind of prophetically seeing the situation from highest perspective. But in terms of other media, I mean, of course, I moved from slides to video. Probably I should be moving into holography. This might be a natural step. And maybe I will actually do so. I'm thinking of doing it. That will be a very different situation because of different sense of immateriality of holographic image. I'm probably not answering to this question.
No, but that was a wonderful answer. And you know, what's so fascinating is
another question before.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Sorry, do you want me to reread it?
yes, please, because I got so involved in trying.
It's about the challenge of time.
Challenge.
Do you have any stories of impacts that have extended past the duration of these projections? In other words, is there a longue durée of impact?
Yes. Well, the principle is that those are temporary projects.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to avoid the danger of turning themselves into decoration, into some kind of ornamentation of public space. In other words, to maybe even to share the fate of some of those monuments themselves that are, as Alois Riegel said, disconnected from events or circumstances, abandoned by, they just lose the meaning and become homeless of history. This might happen also with the projection. If you keep projection forever and becomes part of that monument, no longer really challenges and bringing to life in all confronting a monument with the present day new events, will stop animating it in a general sense. It's not about movement of video. It's just the animation is actually to bring contemporary context into those historic symbolic structures and somehow ask them to listen to what's happening and maybe confront them or embarrass them or turn them into suspects because of the present day discourses that put in doubt the very idealism behind their creation. So, all of those things will get lost if we take too long, but some of those projections lasted quite long. I think the longest one was actually due on the statue of Admiral Farragut in Madison Square Park. It was so long, but it was during the time of epidemics. But I think it was very good because it's one of the few, or maybe the only contemporary art projects just made that was accessible to people, since museums and galleries were closed, and somehow public parks were open. So it was an unusual opportunity to really create conditions for refugees and immigrants to speak for such a long time. That's fine, but otherwise there is a danger if it takes too long. I'm also selected some of those projects today to show because of the circumstances. So in a way, my own work becomes monumental in the sense that it's part of history of my own doing, and I've been working a long time. There are dates attached to those projects, so they become kind of unintentional monuments themselves.
Themselves, yes, indeed.
Projects,
Actually,
but showing them in the context of the crisis in Belarus border, and there is incredible, huge question mark created. What do we do? Where is our place in humanity in face of such political manipulations and events? So similar, of course, to the situation in Germany, where Goethe and Schiller were useful,
right.
As media through which refugees were speaking.
That actually is a nice segue into a question from Maria Rocha Buchel, who asks, how do you address hesitance from people like refugees or domestic violence survivors to speak so publicly on these monuments about their traumatic experiences, which many people are often reluctant to share? And this is about, another aspect, I guess, of public space, which is gaining trust.
Right. Of course, it's not enough to give somebody a microphone or put somebody in front of the camera and then to project that person's voice and expression. It is a long process, and there's enormous amount of opportunities for people who initially would like to speak to actually never show up again, to calculate the level of risk and also consult it with their families and friends, and involve in a larger discourse behind the scene, what to say, or how to say it, why say it, why not, what not to say, which is also part of the art of parousia. So that is the process. Now, in order to start this process, of course, I need to ask for help. Those who are trusted, who should trust my project, myself, and the organizers, institutions, first, in order to help or to, at least allow the people whom they protect against also media people like myself, artists, seeing very serious danger of making sensational story out of their life, or making money on this, or misrepresenting, but also putting people in danger because of immigration authorities, husbands who are seeking revenge. But very often, exactly those who fear the most are the ones who join the project, because they have a sense, intuition, maybe rightly so, that public space has the protective qualities. Once you appear in a public space, in the media, you may be protected. For some people, it will work as a protective space. For others, well, very dangerous and risky. So it's a kind of intelligence and intuition and talent of survivors to take advantage of these cultural projects or not. But anyway.
Yeah, that actually segues into a really interesting question from James Carr, who writes this. It's a little long, but I think it's worth reading through. I thought that the point you made regarding the elevation of the person to a public speaker in a public space as a living monument was so interesting. I was reminded of how, in my recent experience serving on a local planning board, I witnessed time after time the way in which people speaking in a public forum take on more than their own personal interests, but the interests of what they feel to be their community, or the ideals of a community that they want to see come into fruition. Now, with social media, we have a different kind of public stage, one that's anonymous, one also that has a self-selecting audience, and it does not seem to instigate the same type of transformation in the person who is testifying. Do you think this is a change, or is the social media space simply not a public space in the way you see it?
Well, that's a philosophical, anthropological, sociological question. It may be a topic for a separate conference.
It's an amazing question.
I feel that I'm in favor of media in general. When it comes to cultural and social projects that they hope for some change. And when it comes to social media, I can see possibility of including social media into those projects that take physical public space as a stage. The fact that we can communicate with the use of our phones, and we basically have some computer or computational powers, and there is possibility of real-time projections. I can see that physical public space and social media public space can very well work together. We also know that in huge public events that really shook the world in physical public spaces could not have happened without social media, without the use of even cell phones. So I'm just trying to see how to connect those things. With my drone, the projects, there's a possibility of people speaking back from the ground to those speaking angels using their cell phones. And also, those very cell phones or iPads were used in most of my projections as a way to transmit, to film the projection and share it with other people, which brought much more audience because of that. And also, without bringing people physically, it still brought the physical public space to social media public space, within the frame of those screens, which we are now using at this very moment. Anyway, without that media, our meeting will not be able to take place. So this, of course, epidemic situation increased our awareness and also our faith in the potential of media. So I didn't really answer exactly the question, but I like the question. I try to bring more questions to it rather than finding, easy answer. I am in favor of media, of course, as long as they really are doing something that helped a relationship between people.
I'd actually like at this point to bring in Dan, if you would like to sort of pose some of the questions or rephrase them, especially since you did such an extraordinary amount of work for this wonderful exhibition.
Thanks, Erika. Krzysztof and I have been talking for quite some time. It's hard for me to be brief. One of the questions that has come up quite a bit has been a little bit around your own origin. And I think people are asking, like, how did you get started? And one of the things that we wanted to posit within this particular exhibition is your training as an industrial designer. You're beginning as an optical instrument maker. And I would like to make the argument that this design approach, method, and rigor permeates even out into the public projections. Could you talk about that transition for you? Because I know the answer is a very specific commission where you shifted away from solving the design into making a social provocation.
Oh, well, it's the earliest project presented in the exhibition is this walking vehicle And also there's another early project, the personal instrument, which is the listening device. I think it was especially the instrument seemed to be a response to the situation that should not exist in civilized world, not definitely democratic world, because public space, period. I mean, a situation in which we were not allowed to speak much, only listen. So it's a kind of functionalism which I was educated in. That, of course, origins are from Bauhaus, but in fact, it reached our Polish territory via School of Design, Ulm School of Design. We had a connection with Ulm. Ulm, in fact, was closed in 1968, exactly when I was graduating at the time, in a similar way in which Bauhaus was closed. But the thing is that the possibility of seeing scandalous needs as a starting point, as something to which one could respond with functional design. So it's what I call scandalizing functionalism. This is what crossed my mind early on as industrial designer. So the methodology, in fact, is industrial design methodology, meaning systematic design that the need is being a starting point, analysis of needs. But when you see the needs that should not exist, what do? They still exist. Even if government or politics miraculous change overnight, will still, for a long time, people will have needs that should not exist because of fallout of all of the criminal situation in which those needs are born. So, sure. So that brings the different position of a designer, not someone who solves the problem, but someone who accepts the need of emergency response, but hoping that such a response will also help to create more of a consciousness, more new way of thinking that will lead to other design projects that will eventually create situation which you will not need to respond to such needs because they will not exist anymore. There will be other problems, but not this particular problem. So anyway, so what I'm saying is really that I was all for quite a very long time thinking myself as a designer. I resented the word artist, the term artist, for a long, long time. But eventually, I had several colleagues. I was a very interesting community of industrial designers, and very creative people, have really also smart, sharp ideas, but they just disappear. I ended up alone. I could see them on the street, but they were very busy doing what they're supposed to do, I guess, according to the professional script. So once I found myself alone in this personal instrument or walking on this vehicle, I guess I had to accept that I am still a designer, but it is an artistic project that I'm working on.
We're right at time. I do want to say one very quick thing on this 50-year trajectory of your practice. What we're witnessing, it's really an incredible opportunity for us to witness it in a teaching institution. We're witnessing the evolution of a studio-based practice out into civic, out into public space, and also moving across different medias. And I'm not saying anything qualitatively like good, better, best, but what I've noticed is as you move into these different domains, you shift your methodology when you're medium in your civic practices move as well. We call that now social practice in the last 10, 15 years within contemporary art, but you've been doing that in participatory design since you started. We are at time, and I just want to say one final thing. We're going to wrap this talk up. We do have another talk starting within the hour. We will use this same link for any interested participants. We do need to take a break for food and water, and we'll reconvene at 2:30 and another conversation with Krzysztof and Rosalyn Deutsche. I want to thank you, Erika Naginski.
You're welcome.
It was an incredible talk and conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, entire team, for helping to create this remarkable occasion to exchange ideas. I made lots of notes, so I will keep thinking further about your questions and thoughts. Maybe there will be another occasion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Thanks.